Today, June 12th, is known as Loving Day. It's the anniversary of a 1967 Supreme Court decision that struck down state laws against interracial marriage. Since it was a case brought by a couple with the last name Loving against the Commonwealth of Virginia, the decision is called Loving v. Virginia. And so June 12th is Loving Day, a celebration of freedom and civil rights. 1967 wasn't that long ago. It's only a few years before I was born, and most of you here and on Zoom were alive. Maybe you even remember when Loving v. Virginia was decided. Whole generations have grown up with interracial relationships being legal, so Loving Day is also about helping people understand that what we take for granted now wasn't the case only 55 years ago. Mildred Jeter and Richard Loving were both born in the town of Central Point in Caroline County. While the county followed Virginia's strict Jim Crow segregation laws, Central Point had been a mixed-race community since the 19th century. Richard was white. His closest friends were black. Richard's father had long worked for one of the wealthiest black men in the county. Mildred's family identified culturally as Native American, specifically of the Rappahannock tribe, but also had European and African ancestry. Under Virginia's one-drop rule, that meant that Mildred was classified as colored, which was the category into which Virginia lumped together all Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Richard was friends with Mildred's brothers, working on cars together and racing them. When Mildred was in high school, she and Richard started dating. And when Mildred was 18, she became pregnant. Richard moved into her family's house, and they decided to get married. Now, Mildred probably didn't know that interracial marriage was illegal in Virginia, but Richard probably did. In any case, he arranged for them to travel to Washington, D.C. to get married in June 1958, when this congregation was all of 1 month old. Not long after they returned home, the Caroline County Sheriff came to the house at night and arrested them both. Mildred and Richard were charged with cohabiting as man and wife against the peace and dignity of the Commonwealth. A local lawyer, who was an old friend of the judge, worked out terms for them that would keep them out of jail and allow them to stay together, particularly as their child was born. In return for pleading guilty, the judge would suspend a 1-year prison sentence so long as they both left Virginia for 25 years. They agreed to do that and went to live in D.C. Richard was a bricklayer and found work in construction, but living in the city and being away from family and friends was hard for them, particularly for Mildred. Inspired by the March on Washington, Mildred wrote a letter to Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, who referred them to the American Civil Liberties Union, and lawyer Bernie Cohen agreed to represent them. Caroline County would not set aside its judgment, so they went to the district court, which would not overturn it. So their case went to the Supreme Court, which agreed to hear it. The Lovings chose not to attend oral arguments, which they otherwise had a right to do, but Cohen did convey a message from Richard. Tell the court I love my wife, and it is just unfair that I can't live with her in Virginia. The court ruled unanimously in favor of the Lovings, ruling that Virginia's law was unconstitutional. Chief Justice Earl Warren wrote in the majority opinion that the freedom to marry or not marry a person of another race, resides with the individuals and cannot be infringed by the state. Mildred and Richard moved with their children back to Central Point, where Richard built them a house. He was killed in a car accident caused by a drunk driver in the 1970s, but Mildred lived there for the rest of her life. Neither of them wanted to be public people, but in 2007, on the 40th anniversary of Loving v. Virginia, Mildred did issue a statement. My generation was bitterly divided over something that should have been so clear and right. The majority believed what the judge said, that it was God's plan to keep people apart, and that the government should discriminate against people in love. But I have lived long enough now to see big changes. The older generation's fears and prejudices have given way, and today's young people realize that if someone loves someone, they have a right to marry. Surrounded as I am now by wonderful children and grandchildren, not a day goes by that I don't think of Richard and our love, our right to marry, and how much it meant to me to have that freedom to marry the person precious to me, even if others thought he was the wrong kind of person for me to marry. I believe all Americans, no matter their race, no matter their sex, no matter their sexual orientation, should have that same freedom to marry. Government has no business imposing some people's religious beliefs over others, especially if it denies people's civil rights. And she concluded, I am still not a political person, but I am proud that Richard's and my name is on a court case that can help reinforce the love, the commitment, the fairness, and the family that so many people, black or white, young or old, gay or straight, seek in life. I support the freedom to marry for all. That's what Loving, the court case, and Loving, the action, are all about. By then, of course, the struggle for same-sex marriage equality was underway, 3 years before Mildred's statement, and thanks in large part to the efforts of our Unitarian Universalist Association, Massachusetts had become the first state to legalize same-sex marriage. And in 2013, Loving v. Virginia began to be cited as precedent in federal court decisions that struck down state laws against same-sex marriage, including the 2015 Supreme Court decision, Obergefell versus Hodges. If you haven't already seen it, Mildred and Richard's story is told very well in a movie simply entitled Loving that came out in 2016. I strongly recommend seeing it. It was praised for its historical authenticity. It was filmed in Central Point, Caroline County, and Richmond, and their daughter Peggy Loving was a consultant on production. While June 12th should be an unalloyed celebration of Loving, the court case, and Loving, the action, we know that in our society, we can't have nice things. In the early hours of June 12th, 2016, a gunman killed 49 people and injured 53 more at Pulse, a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida. Pulse was hosting a Latin night, and most of the victims were Latinx, making it the deadliest incident in US history against both LGBTQ people and Latinx people. It was also the deadliest mass shooting by a single gunman in US history until the Las Vegas shooting just 1 year later. We're going to show you a clip from the 2016 Tony Awards, which took place the evening of June 12th. So the Pulse massacre was weighing on everybody's hearts. This clip is specifically the acceptance speech by Lin-Manuel Miranda for winning Best Musical for Hamilton, though it's not a speech as such, but a sonnet. Lynn?
And the Tony goes to Hamilton, music and lyrics by Lin-Manuel Miranda.
This marks the second Tony for original score for composer and lyricist Lin-Manuel Miranda. He won the award in 2008 for In the Heights.
I'm not freestyling, I'm too old. I wrote you a sonnet instead.
Yes!
My wife's the reason anything gets done. She nudges me towards promise by degrees. She is a perfect symphony of one. Our son is her most beautiful reprise. We chase the melodies that seem to find us until they're finished songs and start to play. When senseless acts of tragedy remind us that nothing here is promised. Not one day. The show is proof that history remembers. We live through times when hate and fear seem stronger. We rise and fall and light from dying embers, remembrances that hope and love last longer. And love is 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 love, cannot be killed or swept aside. I sing Vanessa's symphony, Eliza tells her story. Now fill the world with music, love, and pride. Thank you so much for this.
Orlando, Las Vegas, Aurora, Virginia Beach, Buffalo, Columbine, Blacksburg, Sandy Hook, Parkland, Uvalde, and too many other places to name in the time I have. In the first 161 days of 2022, which was through Friday, there were 255 mass shootings, defined as a minimum of 4 victims shot, either injured or killed, not including the shooter. In other words, more than 3 mass shootings every 2 days. There have also been over 10,000 suicides by gun, and guns are the leading cause of death for children. Our society has a gun problem. We also have a toxic masculinity problem. We don't have a problem with unlocked back doors. And while we do have a problem with mental illness, it's because people with mental illness are much more likely to be the victims of violent crimes, certainly not the perpetrators. Furthermore, so-called good guys with guns don't actually help. They either hold back or run away and hide. Police in schools make things worse in general, not better. And the idea of arming teachers is stupid on many levels. And while there is some good work being done, such as Raw Tools, which amongst other anti-violence programs literally beat swords into plowshares by turning surrendered guns into gardening tools, it's not enough without government leadership. And yet all of the shootings at nightclubs and supermarkets and churches and movie theaters and concerts and schools apparently isn't sufficient motivation for our lawmakers to do anything. If reports of school children who were literally decapitated by semi-automatic gunfire didn't change any minds, good God, I don't know what will. Instead, our lawmakers would rather ban transgender students in sports, or prevent the accurate teaching of history in schools, or outlaw drag queen story time, or whatever is the latest front in the concocted culture wars, rather than addressing the real world problems of gun violence and racism and economic inequality and climate change that are doing such a good job of telling our young people that there is no hope for their future. And then we wonder why some of them think it's a good idea to buy guns and commit mass murder. Oh, and let's not forget about the Supreme Court's apparent intention to overturn Roe v. Wade this summer. And in case you think that's the end goal of the anti-choice movement, think again. Lined up behind Roe v. Wade are all of the other court decisions that contributed to the progress of our society in recent decades. Griswold v. Connecticut that legalized contraception. Lawrence v. Texas that struck down sodomy laws. Obergefell versus Hodges that legalized same-sex marriage. And yes, Loving v. Virginia that legalized interracial marriage. You may think this is merely the death spasm of, as Mildred Loving put it, the older generation's fears and prejudices, but we ignore the pleas of younger generations to please change the status quo at our peril. In his acceptance speech, Lin-Manuel Miranda includes the powerful line, and love is 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 love. This actually breaks the traditional sonnet structure, which is, of course, only an accepted convention because the people who wrote sonnets agreed to it. And it reflects that love can break accepted conventions too. What's more, Miranda takes the love is love slogan and expands it, saying love a total of 8 times because there's no single form of love. It doesn't need to mean the same thing to everybody. And not only is that okay, but that's the point. As Mildred Loving put it, love is about the commitment, the fairness, and the family that so many people, black or white, young or old, gay or straight, seek in life. So it's not going to look the same every time. Here at the UUFP, we have made connecting in love part of our mission. That was actually the easiest part of figuring out how to put our mission into words. When we were asked to name our core essential values, what really makes us tick as a congregation, we quickly named love. And then when it came to expressing what we do with love, we realized, without too much difficulty, that we connect in love. Of course, given that there are different forms of love, what exactly it means to connect in love will be different for different people under different circumstances. But I want to share what I think it means for us when it comes specifically to deciding how we will be together. In our current principles and sources, our 5th principle names our commitment to the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. The naming of democracy in this principle is a double-edged sword. On the plus side, it is better than almost all of the alternatives when it comes to governing large groups of people. Everybody is supposed to get a vote, and whichever candidate or whatever position gets the most votes is the winner. That requires a lot of good faith to work, though, and it's easy to pervert it, as we're seeing in the states that are meddling with election processes such that lawmakers rather than voters get to pick the winners. But even if democracy worked without such interference, it can still suffer from the tyranny of the majority, when the group with more voters can impose its will on smaller groups. More foundational to liberal religion than our UU principles, though, are the 5 smooth stones, as articulated by UU theologian James Luther Adams. The second smooth stone proposes that relationships between individuals should rest on free and mutual consent, not on coercion. For me, this is how we connect in love. In other words, get any group of people together, and however they want to be in relationship with one another is up to them. Nobody in the group gets to impose their will on anybody else. Nobody gets to claim something is simply right or wrong unless the rest of the group agrees. Nobody gets to appeal to an outside authority. It is up to the people in the group, and only the people in the group, to decide together how they will be together. Because relationships between individuals should rest on free and mutual consent, not on coercion. It's how we connect in love, not only by making sure that everybody is part of the decision, but also by making sure that everybody is on board with the decision. I see this at work in our groups and committees all the time. Yes, a discussion might end with the formality of a vote, but almost always the discussion is about coming to a mutual understanding to which everybody consents. And that's really important, because what matters more than making a decision, what matters so much more than holding a vote, what truly matters are our relationships with one another, how we connect in love. When I have a hard time dealing with the horribleness of the world, when I'm stuck between anger and depression, when I don't know how to respond to senseless cruelty and willful callousness, I set aside the complications and go back to basics. Love is one of those basics, arguably the most important. When we connect in love, when we decide together how we will be together, then I can find hope again. And love is love, 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 cannot be killed or swept aside. May it be so.